Good morning.
Good morning.
Give us your full name and your record, please, ma'am. Oh, yeah. It's morning.
Raise your right hand. Do solemnly swear to tell the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth, self to God.
I
Now give me your full name.
am. Now my name is Sandy Lynn McRaney.
And you go by Sandy.
Yes,
And I call you Sandy.
please.
Sandy, what are you?
And I have two residences. We live here in St. Pete at Marina Walk, which is on 34th Street. And we have our home residence in Winter Garden, Florida.
Okay. You've had dual residence for how long?
About the last 5 years since Will has been pastor of Island Church in Tierbury.
Okay. And you so say, Will, what is your relationship to Will McRaney?
Will and I have been married for over 40 years.
Everybody in the room knows that probably, but there may be some people watching that they'll fully understand, appreciate the background. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your husband, where were you two when you met? How did you meet? What was the early days like? Tell the jury.
Will and I met at Mississippi State University in 1984. We met in the quad area of Mississippi State. I was campaigning. My degree was political science. I was campaigning for a fellow fraternity member of his that was running for president of the Student Association. He was just ambling through the courtyard. And we met each other and arranged later, called me and asked out for a date. And we started dating, and he played baseball and football at Mississippi State. And so he was in baseball season, but we managed to have, I think, 13 days and 9 days. And after that, it was pretty much over for me as to what I thought about him. And but we became engaged a year later. And
your mic is not coming through the stream.
okay. All right. This one's not on. Now? Am I okay with just starting from there?
Yeah, you were saying 13 dates in 9
Yeah,
days.
13 dates
I
in
don't
9
even
days.
understand the math on that, but go ahead.
It's all right. And so he was out of town playing baseball, and so we had to squeeze him in. But became engaged in 84. In April of 85, and were subsequently married in August of 85. We were both still in school. I ended up graduating early. He took a additional semester after that.
When you married this guy, did you have any inclination at all that your lives were going to devolve into the ministry?
No, Will was a baseball player. His degree was in math and general business as well, and so he was thinking about playing baseball, being a baseball coach or whatever. He was offered to try out for the Kansas City Royals. However, what we had done was, at that point in time, a long time ago, athletes in the NCAA were not allowed to be compensated. And so the church that we were a part of, wanted him to be their youth minister. But because of the NCAA rules, that could not happen. So I became the youth minister. And when he graduated, then he was able to assume that title. So that summer, he was asked by the Royals to come to a tryout. But we had a youth retreat scheduled for our kids in Panama City Beach. And so we had to make a decision kind of what part of life we wanted to pursue. And we thought that the Lord was leading us into ministry and not into a life of pursuing baseball. So that's where that started.
And just to be clear, and I don't know if there's any baseball fans here or watching, but Will played with a championship ball team that included Rafael Palmeiro, Will Clark, Jeff Brantley. These guys went on to have major league careers for a long time.
Save record for the baseball, yeah.
And so he forego even an opportunity to do that to follow the Lord.
Yes, we were seriously Jesus followers. That is one reason that we married. I wasn't at a point in time in my life where I was going to date anybody or marry anyone, obviously, who wasn't serious about their commitment to Christ. He had gotten his spiritual life together before he met me, and so when we began dating, that was it's not compartmentalized for us. That is our life. And so we chose to, together, made the decision to do the youth and college job, and then soon after that, he felt like he needed to go to seminary for training, and we began that journey in March of '87.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that journey. Did he I think he mentioned yesterday that he had a pastorship at Jackson Avenue Baptist Church while he was attending seminary. Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury a little bit about that, please.
Seminary, we went to seminary at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. We toured several different seminaries, but felt like the Lord was leading us to New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, where he enrolled in classes in March of '87. I began my student teaching, got clearance to do student teaching, even though my degree was in political science. Politics and religion, I thought at that time, didn't mix. I didn't know how heavily I was going to be involved in the politics of actually what happens now with the Southern Baptist Convention. But I pursued a teaching degree after that in order to help with our income. And so when we got to New Orleans, he also served as a pastor in Jackson County, Mississippi, in Pascagoula. And we lived in their pastorium, and he would travel back and forth to the seminary for classes. And that was for about 2.5 years.
Okay. And when he graduated seminary, because I'm not going to say where did you guys choose, where did the Lord lead you? What did you do?
Well, Will finished his master's, and then I asked, could we please have a break? So we had 3-month break before he started his PhD. I was looking for something a little bit longer than that. However, he went ahead and began his PhD work. And so when he finished his PhD work, he knew that he wanted to church plant somewhere. So we began trying to identify cities that needed a gospel presence more. Church planting is very, very common right now. It's a buzzword. It's become very routine especially in the Southern Baptist tribe. But when we were doing it, it was not so much the cool thing to do, nor was it an ordinary thing to do. And so we felt like that's what the Lord was leading us to do, but we needed to go to a population center that did not have as much of a presence. And so we looked at Boca Raton, Florida, was one of the cities that came up. Will did demographic research on different places. Phoenix, Arizona was another place, and Denver, Colorado was one. And when we made our trip to Denver, it was very apparent that the Lord was speaking to us that was the place to be. We were on the top of a mountain up there. I think it's called Lookout Mountain. I can't remember that exactly, but I remember we were up there, and we had our 3-month-old with us on that trip. Our 3.5-year-old was back with my parents. But I remember being up there, and the song on the radio came across, "People Need the Lord," while we were on the top of that. And we just thought, this is definitely, we knew in our spirit that was what we were supposed to do. And as Will had said, and you're saying at that point, that was one of the more unchurched areas in the entire United States. Yes. We came back and began fundraising efforts to take us out there. At that point in time, the Home Mission Board, which is what it was then, would only support you 35%. You had to raise the other 65% of your support in order to go church plant. And you could not church plant as a team. If you had enough money to be a team, then you had more money than was necessary. And so it was a solo operation, so we had to raise the rest of our funding in order to be on mission out there.
How long were you on the mission field out there?
We arrived in October of '92, and we left in August of '96.
And you left to go to where?
New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, on faculty at New Orleans.
Shortly after you left, was there a significant event that happened in the area where you guys had been ministering for 4 years?
Well, yes, Columbine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Columbine was very close to where we were. We were in Littleton. Columbine is the high school that our children would have been zoned to if we had remained in that area.
And speaking of which, we really don't know about your children. You've mentioned that you have this and that, but tell us a little bit about your family.
We have 3 girls, all adult children now, obviously, all married with their own children. So we have Blakeney and her husband Jeffrey. They have 3 children. They live in Orlando. We have Hadley is married to Travis. They just had their 2nd child. They live in Taylor, South Carolina. And Macy and Jerry. Macy is our 3rd daughter, married to Jerry, and they have 3 children. And they live in Travelers Rest, South Carolina.
Okay. So how long were you at the New Orleans Seminary?
We were at New Orleans Seminary for 11 years. That was our growing up years for our girls, really mainly.
And lived in an area called Mandeville, I believe.
Yes, we lived across Lake Pontchartrain in Mandeville.
Now, from there, where did you go?
After our years at the seminary, Will began to sense that the Lord was stirring in him, that he had kind of completed everything that he could do at New Orleans, rewritten curriculum for evangelism, and done so many different things, and he began to sense that the Lord was moving him. You know, one of the principles in ministry that we've always applied to ourselves is that you do not go from where you are until there is a stronger call than the one that you have. But you have to investigate those little nudges to see, is the Lord moving you here, or is he moving you there? And this, of course, doesn't just apply to ministry. It should actually apply to anyone who is a believer, because God should be directing you. However, we began to believe that a move was in the works. And so he was contacted by the Florida Baptist Convention, contacted him, and said, is there any way that you would be interested in coming to Florida and being on the evangelism staff, not as the evangelism director, but on the evangelism staff? And so we began to pray about that, and we felt like that was the right move. And so in July of 2007, we made the move. It should be noted, however, that in January of 2007, the seminary knew of our plans, but they still allowed Will to teach for that entire semester, and we were able to work out an arrangement where we traveled back and forth to look for housing. And also Dr. Sullivan used Will in Florida prior to that, but Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Kelly's arrangement was a very cordial one, and it was a cordial departure from New Orleans Seminary.
Okay. And so is that where you made your home that you still reside in now?
We still live in the same city of Winter Garden. We have changed homes. We are in a home now that is on a lake that we considered our retirement home. We bought this home when we moved to Maryland, Delaware. The housing up there is incredibly expensive. And so we just lived in an apartment up there. And when we came back for visits, because our family was here, our home was being rented to someone else while we were up there. And so we began to look to see if we could purchase something else, and we did. And that's the home we reside in now.
Okay. So throughout the course of your life in ministry, there were no significant ministerial events that occurred, correct? I mean, for the most part. He had a very life-changing, life-threatening event while you guys were in Florida. You might mention that.
Yes, 2009, I was in a Bible study in the summer of 2009 at First Baptist Orlando, where we were members while Will was on staff with Florida Baptist Convention. Since he wasn't in a church preaching every single Sunday, our membership resided at First Orlando, and we were very active in a life group there. That summer, I was involved in an additional women's Bible study, and one of the questions in the Bible study is, what has ever happened in your life that has just devastated you and made you rethink? And I thought, I've never had anything that's devastated me. Nothing has ever devastated me. Nothing has ever shaken my faith. And what I didn't know then, I found out about 6 weeks later. Will was involved in a head-on collision at 100 miles an hour with a drunk driver. He was coming back from an event that Florida Baptist Convention had sponsored, and he was on the road, and he was hit in the curve by the drunk driver with a combined speed of 100 miles an hour. He was airlifted to the hospital at Orlando Regional, And they called me and said, you have to come to the hospital. They would not tell me anything about what was going on other than that I needed to be there. The funny thing is, when Will was airlifted, they asked him, he was cognizant, and they said, what's your wife's cell number? He said, you better not call her cell number. She won't answer it after 10 o'clock. You have to call the house phone. So he called the house phone, the chaplain did, and I went to the hospital, and Will had multiple surgeries regarding his injuries, nothing that affected him internally or his head, but multiple fractures of his leg, compound fractures, arm, wrist as well. But rehab hospital for 37 days and then came home, and he was spared. His life was spared in that accident. And his life obviously was spared for a purpose.
And we all believe that, and he's made a full recovery
Yes.
from what was almost his instantaneous death.
Yes.
Now, how did you guys wind up coming to Maryland, Delaware?
Well, Maryland, Delaware, I think Will received a phone call from a friend who had been a fellow professor at New Orleans Seminary. And this friend had moved to Maryland, Delaware, and was on the staff of the Baptist Convention of Maryland, Delaware. The current executive director at that time was Dr. David Lee, and he had announced his retirement, and they were going to begin to look for someone. And so this friend, Dr. Randy Millwood, asked if he could submit Will's name to be the new executive director. And Will said, well, sure, you can do that. That's not, I don't have a issue with that or whatever, you may do that. And then it just mushroomed from there. There's questionnaires, there's interviews, there's everything, but all along the way, I mean, this was just every step seemed to be, this one goes forward and it goes forward into the next, but it was not something that we had sought out. No respect to Maryland, Delaware. Maryland, Delaware is a cold place. I am very much, and I don't mean spiritually, I'm talking about temperature-wise, and I have never lived, well, we did spend time in Colorado, but that's different kind of cold. Maryland, Delaware is really cold, and I wanted to stay beneath I-10, and so the Lord had to do a work in me to, we knew, though, that that's where we were supposed to go, so.
And so when did you go and where did you go?
He was elected as the executive director, I think on September 10th of 2013. And at that point, we were in a transitional time period where we were back and forth until January the 14th of 2014, when we moved into an apartment in Laurel, Maryland, right outside of Columbia.
Sandy, this is a little bit off script, but I very much get the sense that for you and Will, when we talk in terms of platitudes about couples and ministry teams, most of us really don't understand what that is, but it sounds to me like you and Will are really a ministry team. Could you tell the jury a little bit about that? In other words, do you confide and pray and share about everything that happens?
If there's something we don't confide about, I don't know it. However, when you decide as a person that you're going to give your life over to God, for me, that was early on. I was 6 years old when that happened. I've desperately tried to follow Jesus my entire life. Doesn't matter. I mean, there's mistakes along the way, obviously, or whatever. But I was looking for a man who was going to follow God in the same way, because I don't want to be in a situation where our goals are so incompatible that we're going to be at odds over small things, large things, in the middle things. And so our relationship has been one of very few intense moments where there's been disagreements. It's not a perfect relationship. I don't believe that exists, but we do have a partnership, and we try very hard to, when we minister to people, and are in any type of ministry setting, we try to do it with our whole hearts, and we don't ask people to do things that we ourselves are not willing to do, and we try to be, as I would hope most people would try to be in the ministry, you try to be as authentic, not necessarily transparent, but as authentic and relatable and as close to Jesus as you can get that day.
Certainly, you guys were in Maryland, Delaware. Will was working as executive director for at least a year and a half before there were any issues that are involved, my understanding.
Yeah, it was a golden time. It was really golden. I am an English lit person, and I'm just going to tell you, it reminded me of like Camelot because of John Kennedy and things, because everything that Will proposed to Maryland, Delaware, they were in agreement with it. They were ready for I'm not casting any type of shadow on the previous administration that was there, but he came in with fresh ideas, reinvigorated, the name change. That's why you might even see on some of the documents that you have, it says Mid-Atlantic Baptist Network. That's because it was a name change for what had previously been known as the Baptist Convention of Maryland, Delaware. But we thought that the words Mid-Atlantic region actually was more encompassing of who we were and who our churches were. There were about 550-something churches in our network. His job is not to directly get in their business, but it is to provide a comprehensive strategy of how these churches work together in Maryland, Delaware to get the gospel out. Baltimore, 70% heroin addicts. It is a tough place to minister. And so you have a lot of burnout with pastors, and you have very few churches in that area as well. The rest of the state is almost completely different. You have Southern Maryland, you have Western Maryland, more like frontier. But all of those churches work together to get the gospel out in their particular vernacular, in their particular region, with the way that their particular people understand it. And Will knew that, and he was trying to bring all that together. We had over 100 pastors in small groups throughout the week. That had not been done before. The first convention, Joel referenced Florida Baptist Convention. The state conventions, there are 41. Those state conventions always meet in the fall because the national convention is in the summer. The state conventions meet every fall in order to do their own state business. So Maryland, Delaware's convention is also in November. The first true convention that we were in charge of was 2014. And so we saw an uptick in the attendance from around 250 to 300 to over 700 people at that conference, at that convention. So the time that we were there, the ministry that we did, I was heavily involved. I ran the ministry to the pastors' wives in that area. We were in over 90 churches in 18 months on a Sunday morning. We would sometimes leave at 5 or 5:30 in the morning, drive as far as we could to the farthest church so that we could be in one of their services, and then drive to another church so we could be at their 10 o'clock service, and then we'd go somewhere else who had a 11:30 service. That was not an atypical Sunday for us. We took pastors out to dinner. How can we help you? It's just what that role required, and he was up for it.
So, Sandy, tell the jury when you first realized there may be some problem in Camelot.
When that letter came on December 2nd, because when the FedEx guy came, he handed the letter to me.
Okay. Tell me what happened.
That letter from Kevin Ezell, the separation agreement cancellation letter, the FedEx guy came into the executive office, and Donna, who was the executive assistant, she and I happened to be in there when this letter came. And of course, I didn't open the letter, but the letter was there, and read that letter. And once that letter was read by our team, and was just in shock that, number one, I was in shock about the words about Will. I think it's persistent, willful disregard or lack of regard or whatever.
Look, it's exhibit number 2 in the book right in front of you.
okay? Whatever it says there, I was in shock about that.
Willfully and repeatedly ignoring the strategic partnership agreement.
Yes, because he wasn't willfully, repeatedly ignoring the partnership agreement, working very hard for Maryland, Delaware to advance the gospel through Maryland, Delaware. NAM has its part in that, but Will is responsible for making sure that Maryland, Delaware did its part, and he had not broken the agreement.
Okay. So, how did that event affect your family prior to his termination? That is, what efforts was your husband making to try and say, understand what's happening and make a reconciliation and move forward?
Okay, well, that letter came on December 2nd, but before December 2nd is Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving week, we had allotted to be able to go back to Winter Garden and have a week with our family, and everyone was going to be at our house. Will's mother was there, my dad was there, and our girls were there, and I am in the kitchen doing the Thanksgiving meal together. Grandchildren are running around. The girls are talking. My dad's engaged in talking. All of this is going on. The son-in-laws. And Will is sitting in a chair that we have in that area. He's typing the letter to Kevin Ezel. It's a long letter, but it's who Will is. He told you on the stand that he's a writer, and he's a prolific writer, and it is a gift that God has given him. It's a gift that I've seen God use. If we didn't have the documentation and the writing that we've done, many of these claims that we've made would be unsubstantiated. But here he is in the middle of all this, talking on the phone with Harold Bullock, trying to get advice from Harold on this situation with Kevin Ezel seems to have just gone off the rails. This is before the cancellation letter, but we knew things were tense. And I guess what I wanted to say about the Thanksgiving time is this should be a time where we're not concerned with any of this. We've got Thanksgiving, we've got our family, but many of you know when you get in leadership roles and executive roles, they don't go by a 9-to-5 schedule, and it doesn't matter what holiday it is. And if there's a job to be done, he was going to do it. And he felt it was important to get this I don't want to say conciliatory letter like he had done something wrong, but just to express to Kevin, I want to work with you. I want to do these things. I'm really not sure what you are talking about when you're saying that we have been, disagreeable, or that there are things that we're not following, or why there's tenseness in our relationship.
Okay. So that was Thanksgiving, and then you get the December 2nd letter.
Yes.
And then what was the next thing that happened in the escalation? I think you've heard testimony that there was a conspiracy going on, that Will was going to be terminated before he even knew anything about it. But what role did you play in that, and what happened?
Well, we knew nothing about any of things that were behind the scenes that were of the nature that would have been trying to get him out. We knew nothing of any of that. There was a specially called board meeting in February in which they gave him a 100% vote of confidence, as also they 100% rejected NAM's offer to totally take over church planting in Maryland, Delaware. That was, our board said, no, we do not want North American Mission Board to totally take over church planting. We still want to have a part in that. That's our mission field. And so that board meeting occurred in February, not a normally called board meeting, but because Will wanted to keep the board informed. The next board meeting was in May. Now, all along the way, the admin team group meet. I think they met on a monthly basis. But in May at the board meeting, there's nothing that's mentioned about any problems with our board, problems with anything else other than how are we going to get this funding situation with NAM corrected. But there was nothing of any animosity among our board members, any questioning of Will's leadership and his work and what he was doing. So when this meeting occurred on June the 2nd, that he thought was an ordinary budget meeting to prepare for 2016, he was completely blindsided by the document that they present to him. I believe it was written by Bill Warren, which outlined 6 different areas that they felt Will had completely needed work on. And the very first one was call Kevin Ezel, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, so you guys will have to figure that out. But I think the first one was call Kevin Ezel and hit the reset button. Another one on there said something about, and this is the only other one that I remember, was you do not have any relationships, you do not have good relationships with the pastors in our convention. So when he comes out of this meeting, he's ashen-faced because he's stunned. And we don't talk about it there. We drive to the apartment, and we had a guest with us, because the guest was going to be speaking to our staff the next day at our staff meetings for staff development. And so he's with us, and Will says, this is what I got, and he went through it, and one of them was, like the apology thing or whatever. And I said, you can't apologize, honey, for things you haven't done. There's no apologizing for things if you haven't done them. And his response to me was, Sandy, I have to model humility, and I have to model teachability. And whether or not, we know these things are not accurate, but I can work through a process where they will see that I can model this, and we can work through it enough to where we get to a resolution on the other side. They gave him 48 hours to decide whether he would, in their book, correct these 6 things or have some type of action plan to correct these 6 things. 48 hours. Had a couple of meetings with an admin chair who said, I don't really know why, sorry, this has gotten out of hand, But when he called Bill Warren as well as Mark Dooley and told him that he was going to work on these 6 things that they had suggested, they told him that he had 2 weeks to work on those things. But what they didn't tell us was that they called an out-of-order board meeting for Monday. The very next Monday, this was on a Thursday, they called a board meeting for that very next Monday, and at that board meeting, he was terminated.
And of course, what you didn't know at that point was that NAM was threatening to withhold their funding to Maryland, Delaware, if Will was still the executive director.
Absolutely not. I had no idea that there was any type of extortion, threat, blackmail, whatever you want to call that. Every one of those applies. That the words that we found out later was by Bill Warren, said to Clint Scott, who I believe has a declaration that's inside of our notebooks here, is that as long as Will McRaney is executive director of Maryland, Delaware, you will not have the $1 million. That's partnership money.
So you had this emergency board meeting. What happened?
I don't know. I wasn't allowed to be there. They told him I could not come. It was held off-site. It was not held at our facilities, which is where every other board meeting is always held. They held it at a pastor's church, and they told him I could not go. You guys know me. I'm thinking, I need to be there. This is my husband. This is us. We're a team. But he's the executive director, and I'm not, and I know that. And I don't want to usurp his authority, and I don't want to, so I acquiesced and didn't go because I thought, well, if I go, you know what that's going to show? That's going to show he can't even control his own wife. He's told her not to be here, and here she comes and shows up. And I don't want to be a part of making things any worse than they were, because obviously there were so many false thoughts and conclusions and things that people just had rampant in their heads that weren't accurate. I didn't need to add to that, so I didn't go. So when he came home from that, he told me he was terminated.
All right. Sandy, use some words right now to describe the feelings that you and Will were going through at the moment you found out that he had been terminated from his job?
Well, it's a devastating feeling. You can only be betrayed by people you know. That's a quote that I've learned over these 10 years, and it is so accurate. You can't be betrayed by the cashier at Publix, but you can be betrayed by people you have had numerous meals with and whose feet have been under your table. The idea, knew it was in God's hands, though, Harvey. I couldn't believe it had happened, but I also know that somehow one of the things that we told each other was we remembered the situation in the Bible when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego go into the furnace. And so we talked about that, and we sat in his easy chair together and said that, you know, whatever God's going to do with this, we belong to him. And if we go into this and we're rescued from the fire, then the glory will be to God. And if we're not rescued from the fire, then the glory still goes to God. So that was our talk between each other about this.
Well, I actually, as you related to me, I thought you guys had a prayer. You said in Will's armchair or something like that.
Yeah, I just said that, buddy. You weren't listening.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm looking at my notes.
That's all right.
You're right. You caught me again.
That's okay.
Okay.
I'm probably not supposed to correct.
All right.
That's why I didn't need to go to the board meeting, I guess.
Sandy, so tell me, following this, what did you and Will believe was going to happen?
Well, both of us, probably, he's a very optimistic person, and he's very persistent. It's actually his best and worst quality. But neither of us thought, we just thought, good grief, this is going to get resolved because they're going to figure out that none of this is accurate. We're going to be able to clear this up. And Will is also one with, if he thinks if he can get out more information, that changes people's mind. It doesn't. At a point, people decide, I'm going to continue to believe what I want to believe no matter what is put in front of me. And that is a dangerous spot to be in. And so he began, calling different people, writing different people, saying, guys, do you understand what this is really about? Do you understand how this happened? At this point, we still don't know tons about Kevin Ezel's involvement, nor do we know all of the things that have happened over these last 10 years. We don't know all of that yet, that the Lord has actually dropped in our laps to expose as well. It became apparent as time went by, and I may be getting ahead here, but it became apparent over these last 10 years that God has used what has happened to us to expose corruption, misguided behavior, and unfit ministry capacities that are taking place at high levels in our tribe. What is startling to me, and I brought this one note up here with me. Here is a verse that I've come across over the last couple of years. I have it on my mirror at the apartment. Great peace have those who love your law, and nothing causes you to stumble. Psalm 119, 165. Doesn't mean that we're not going to make a mistake, but we have great peace in the way that we have conducted ourselves through what we have been through in trying to right this wrong. What was done to Will was wrong. Tortious interference is wrong. To be allowed to have a part in taking away someone else's job because you're going to withhold money, and then when the person is gone, you give the money back, that is wrong. That should not happen. The defaming in order to make it more palatable, then you've got to start defaming and deceiving. And all of this is just sin that just keeps multiplying and going. And that's what Satan is so good at. And the saddest thing to me was I said that all Satan had to do was kind of like raise his little finger. He didn't have to do a whole lot. It just went down. And it's so sad. But the other thing that is startling to me is I've written here, is I don't want to imagine a time when what offends God doesn't bother me. His holiness and righteousness matter to me. So when things are revealed that expose that, no matter how difficult it is to believe it could happen, you have a responsibility to investigate it and check it out. And for the non-investigation, the blind eyes, the stopped up ears, all of that in the positions of trust as trustees, as executive committee members, as other state executive directors, for all of this to be ignored because you just don't want to deal with it, or you've seen it for so long you've become accustomed to it. If that ever happens to me, I want God to remove me, because that is not what his world is about. The other thing that is concerning about that is we have a society that watches everything that we do. And if we on the inside of the Christian world cannot get this right among ourselves, we have no standing, and it damages our witness. So to me, from the very beginning, this was about the glory of God, and Will as well. What are we going to do? Because God is offended in these situations, and this unrighteousness needs to be exposed no matter what the personal cost is.
Post-termination, you found out of Kevin Ezel's involvement. How did that come about?
The way we found out about Kevin Ezel's involvement is because of Clint Scott. Clint, I believe we were already back in Winter Garden. We had driven back. The convention ended on something like the 15th, maybe. I can't really remember. It may have been 13th. Within a couple of days, we went back to Baltimore. The convention, I believe, was in Columbus, Maryland. We went back to Baltimore, and then we began the drive home, not with our possessions, just with our, some clothes and those kinds of things. And we drove back. When we got back to Winter Garden, I think we had been there maybe a couple of days, and I think that Will got a call from Clint Scott because Clint had been busy. Clint was not on the General Mission Board of the Baptist Convention of Maryland, Delaware, so he was not privy to the things that had happened with all of that. He found out about Will's termination, and he called Bill Warren, who was the president of the convention. He was not the General Mission Board president, and there is a distinction. He was the president of the convention. That is an elected position and is usually held for 1 year, and then they may repeat. He was not the president of our board of trustees. But he called Bill Warren. He said, what is this deal with Will McRaney? What in the world happened there? And Bill Warren had a conversation with Clint over the phone. Clint listened, called Will, and said, this is what Bill Warren said. And Will, through the discernment of God, which this has happened so many times in what we've gone through, allowed Will to have the presence of mind to tell Clint, you write down what you remember from that conversation, and then you send it back to Bill Warren in email form, and you ask him to correct anything that is incorrect. And Clint did that. And through that, we have the information that Bill Warren said, that Kevin Ezel said, that as long as Will McRaney is the executive director of the Baptist Convention of Maryland, Delaware, you will not have the $1 million.
So now the rock's turned over and Will knows what the problem area is. What did he try to do to reconcile that?
What did Will try to do to
Yes.
reconcile? Well, a year later, during all that time period, he's still trying to get people to understand, what happened. And But we were in a period of 6 months goes by when our severance ends, and then he writes his letter of concern. So he wrote his letter of concern in February of 16. That's the one that's been referenced. And then they denied that. Then the lawyers contacted us and said, you've got to quit talking. You know, you're putting this stuff on the internet. Well, the internet's all we had. We don't have a PR agency. We don't have a staff. We have nothing. All we've got is the truth, and the only way to get it out there was to put it on the blog. So Will has willmcraney.com. He put it on there. It's for everybody to see because it's all truthful. There's nothing untruthful. We've tried all the kind of private methods, you know what I mean? So our only defense was to do that. However, as time went by, we had different times where we met with different people, gave us advice. Will sought counsel from various leaders. You know, how do we handle this going forward or whatever? And in late July, August of 2016, we decided that we just need to we've done what we can. Nothing seems to be coming of this, and we're just going to let it go. So what we did was, on the advice of a SBC leader who said, I think this is probably an appropriate thing for you to do, we sent Kevin Ezel a plant to his office at the North American Mission Board. And we wrote, blessings on you and your ministry, I believe. Because we decided that we're just going to let this go. We are going to move forward with whatever God has for us next. We don't know what it is, but we're going to move forward. And so we sent this plant.
Okay. So you're trying to just bring an end to all of it and get back with your life, because in the meantime...
Get back with our life. We're trying to have a new one because we don't have nothing
Tell
as
the
far
jury
as
about
employment.
Yeah, tell the jury about the social interaction you guys are going through or not going through, the finances your guys are going through or not going through, daughters in college and how that affected them.
Well, you mentioned the daughter in college. Macy was in her final year at Furman on the golf team number 7 in the country. And she came to us and she said, I know finances are going to be tight, so I'm going to graduate early. And that's going to save you guys, you know, $45,000 basically, was our half, because she was on a half scholarship. And so the scholarship was 30, but there's room and, you know, there's all the other things associated with college. You guys know that. So she forewent her last semester of school. She sped up so that she could graduate. So here she is on the golf team, women's golf team, number 7 in the country at that point in time. She decides to do that. That was a sacrifice on her part to do that. We've got the weddings. The weddings come about later, you know. But I mean, Will was unemployed for 4.5 to 5 years without gainful, reasonable employment. We talked to some search teams, would call us every now and then from different churches. One in particular, I remember, called us, and so we said, well, we do have a situation with the North American Mission Board. This was after we'd filed a lawsuit, but we were in full disclosure letting them know. They called us back the next day, and they said, we don't need a person with that much baggage. Didn't bat an eye. Didn't matter what it was about, you know, how it transpired. It's understandable. It's understandable. Why should a church get involved in all that when they don't have to? But neighbor-wise, emotionally for me, pretty difficult. I'm pretty much a very social person. I don't mind relating to people. I did not want us to talk about our situation in front of our neighbors, or even when we would visit another church to try to go there on Sundays or whatever, because I didn't want anybody to know that a Christian ministry had treated a Christian minister so despicably. And so for my non-Christian friends, which are a lot of our neighbors, I honestly thought one of the worst things that can happen is for them to think, oh, you know that stuff I think about religion? It's all right. You know, it's this way. It's all corrupt. Why would I want to have anything to do with their God? So we kept a very low profile as far as our circle of friends and that type of thing went socially. It's hard to explain. You develop some anxieties along these lines where you're not sleeping well, so you don't go to sleep till 3 or 4 in the morning, so you don't necessarily get up early. Then your day started later. It's difficult to explain. God was obviously there through all of this and met us, but the emotional part of what happened, people who go through these types of things know exactly what I'm talking about. And it is a betrayal. It's a devastating feeling. You just don't expect it to come from the hands that it came from.
Let me throw out some of these words that have been used in this case. Obstinate, delusional, whiny baby, liar.
Yeah.
Do any of those things in any way, shape, or form describe anything you know about Will McRaney?
No. I mean, he doesn't like regular mayonnaise. It has to be Miracle Whip. But other than that, we're good.
Okay. So you guys are trying to bring an end to it with the plant. You're just trying to say, look, it's over. We're done. We're through. We're going to get on with our life. Did that end it?
We thought it did. We thought it did until we realized why we were disinvited from the missions conference that was happening in Louisville, Mississippi. Will had been scheduled to speak. Rob Paul had been trying to get Will to speak at his missions conference in Louisville, Mississippi. They had a kind of an endowment at that church where a woman was very interested in missions, and she endowed a certain amount of money for that church to host a missions conference every year. And he'd been trying to get Will to speak for several years, but because of our schedule and the Maryland, Delaware, when he was in Maryland, Delaware, we just couldn't, opportunities like that, you had to be very selective about where you went. Not that there's anything wrong with Louisville, it just couldn't take the time to do it. We needed to be somewhere else. So when Will became unemployed, that invitation resurfaced, and Will accepted it, only to kind of, for Rob to go radio silent. We were supposed to stay at his home. Will was supposed to be a speaker at that conference, and none of it materializes. Rob did not answer our phone calls anymore. We obviously knew at that point, I mean, there wasn't a phone call really to say you're disinvited. It just never got any more details about it. So that was that. Then, of course, you've heard from Dr. Breidenbaugh about the call from Jimmy Scroggins, which was from Kevin, which was to disinvite Will to that. Joel stood his ground. That didn't happen. And I'm thinking, wow, this is kind of amazing. The real clincher for me, I will tell you, came when we were sitting at a table for lunch at the Florida Baptist Convention conference that Will ended up speaking at. So that same conference, we went to lunch. We went to lunch at Joe's Crab Shack in Clearwater. And as we're sitting there having lunch with Rick Wheeler, Rick says, you know what? I think you guys are in pretty good shape. It's been a while. You look like you're doing pretty good. I want to show you something. So he takes his phone and he shows Will and he says, do you know who that is? And Will looks at the picture and he says, yeah, that's me. And Rick says, do you know where this picture is? And Will says, no. He said, it's inside of the welcome desk at the North American Mission Board. And Will said, what? He said, yeah. He said, I took a picture of it to have the picture. And, of course, he had no idea of the importance of that at all, you know. But he took the picture of it, and he said, yes, he said, I was at North American Mission Board for an associational mission strategist meeting that the North American Mission Board host, and he said, I was asked to kind of greet people as they come through the doors, and he said, I walk around the receptionist desk, and there's your picture. So he said, I took a picture of it. And Will said, well, it's a good picture of me. It is me, you know. But that picture, like, what is Will's picture doing there? I mean, you have pictures in the post office of people who are wanted. I'm thinking, what? And so, obviously, he wasn't wanted there. We didn't see any words with the picture, but that was what was there. We got home after that, and I told Will, and by he, I meant Kevin Ezel. I said, he is never going to leave us alone. Because we'd send him the plant, we don't get to speak at the conference, you know, in Louisville. Joel Breidenbach gets called. He wants him off a Florida Baptist Pastors Conference breakout session. Not even a main speaker, a breakout speaker. And Joel, I don't know it was $500. I thought it was more like a gift certificate to Longhorn Steakhouse. But it doesn't matter. The idea, and then to know that his picture was posted at the North American Mission Board. What type of person or agency allows this type of following people and doing this? This is a vindictive nature type of thing. This is not godly character. And that is what made me begin to think that we're going to have to do something. The idea of a lawsuit had been brought up to Will before. We were not interested in it. Not interested in it. The Bible has plans for reconciliation between brothers. We tried to follow those. But when these remaining attempts, and those are only 3 things that we are aware of. Well, there's a few other things that we're aware of, I guess, too. But can you imagine the places that we don't know? That he never got a call because somebody as uncourageous as Joel said, okay, I want to invite him. Joel stood up and said, I'm going to invite him anyway. He's going to speak. But you don't know how many calls took place, how many conversations in hallways, what he's saying and what he's doing, Kevin Ezel is doing, that is preventing us from having gainful employment, tearing down a man's character. When you're in the ministry and your name goes, that's all you've got. So that was enough for me to begin the conversations again about a lawsuit. In regard to the lawsuit, you can stop me if you don't want me to share anymore.
Keep going.
But the lawsuit, I had 2 people that I said, if these 2 people agree that a lawsuit is the appropriate venue to begin our next phase because of what Kevin Ezel is doing, then I will go along with that. The 2 people that I was interested in their opinion on whether they thought a lawsuit was all right were my dad. So my dad is a stalwart man, and I greatly value what he thinks. And he's been through some wars himself, and he's a lot like Will. And I wanted to know what he thought. And he told me that he thought that that was an appropriate venue, that it had reached the point where that was okay to do. And then Harold Bullock, who Will greatly values, and I do too, has been a mentor for over 40 years, said the same thing. So when those 2 godly men collided on the same thing, that a lawsuit would be okay, then we began to pursue that.
So how did I stumble into the picture?
You're the only lawyer we knew.
That's not much of an endorsement.
Not only are you one of the few lawyers that we knew, you are a godly man in your own right. And we knew that if we needed somebody to fight for us, you would tell us whether this was a worthy fight or not. You would also be very engaged in being godly yourself while undertaking this whole process. So I think we called you. I know I had a conversation with you. I think Will was out of town, but I had a conversation with you in February of 17. And on that phone call that you and I had, we talked about this, and you prayed with me on the phone about this situation.
I recall a dinner in Orlando.
Oh, okay. You're right about that.
Yeah.
There was a dinner in Orlando that happened when you came down to try a case or get some depositions or something. And we went to dinner with you. That was very soon after all of this had gone down with the termination. And Will was telling you what had happened to him, and your words were, that is tortious interference. Well, we'd never heard those words before. Tortious interference, what in the world does that mean? And you explained to us what tortious interference was. Is when someone from an outside agency interferes with the contract that you have with another agency, and in some way that affects your employment. Or in our situation, it was an employment situation.
So the lawsuit was filed 2017.
April the 7th?
It's been quite a journey
Yeah,
to the Supreme Court of the United States twice,
yes.
who wouldn't hear the case.
Accurate. And we actually, our attorney who joined us later, Scott Gant, actually asked us the first time. You see, NAM is the one that filed for the Supreme Court to hear the case the first time. We did not.
Because we won the first.
That's right. We won the first time in the Fifth Circuit, and NAM appealed that decision to the Supreme Court, not us. And we have a choice whether we wanted Scott at that point in time to argue that the case should be heard by the Supreme Court or to argue that it should not be heard by the Supreme Court. We advised Scott, and when I say we, Will is the client, I was not the client, but Will advised Scott that the case, we did not want the case to be heard by the Supreme Court at that point in time because we knew how NAM was going to frame it as a matter of religious liberty, and it is not First Amendment speech, those types of things. And so we did not want Southern Baptists to be locked into a decision at that point because we knew it would be bad for Southern Baptist if this case goes the way that NAM wants it to go. It limits, it gets into the hierarchy and all that kind of stuff, and we didn't want that. So we argued that it wouldn't be heard, and it was not heard.
Sandy, the lawsuit in the civil courts is over. Agreed?
Yes, February 20th of this year.
And Will has never had an opportunity to present his facts, his version of the facts, to any jury, church, judge, or anything until now. Is that correct?
That is accurate.
Okay, so here we are in a church tribunal. What do you want to have happen?
Well, I was very excited and happy to know that things are going to be laid out and exposed. These are not unsubstantiated facts. They are substantiated. The things that he has been saying all along throughout our videos and other methods, writing, whatever else, they all have basis. And it is refreshing that this type of opportunity is available to us to do. It is a novelty, I will say that. It was not something that we had thought of at all, but I appreciate the idea and the implementation of it because it's given a venue for these matters to be explored to some degree. There's, of course, much, much more. But that has been really good, and so I appreciate that. Obviously, reconciliation is the goal, should be the goal, but before you ever have reconciliation, you got to have repentance. And repentance is not something that can be manufactured by us. That is up to the other person. And so I would love to see repentance take place. I would love to see people stand up and say, we can't have, and this is, I would like people to say that this type of behavior in our leaders cannot be tolerated. There's a certain amount of insulation that takes place, which you go up against as a person who's trying to change things. That person who is in leadership is automatically insulated because people think they never would have gotten there if they're a horrible type of person, or if their character doesn't substantiate it. That's not accurate. Sometimes the leadership, it starts that way, and then they veer it off because power, as we know, corrupts. And so, sadly, I would like to see a righteous North American Mission Board. And I can tell you that a righteous North American Mission Board does not include Kevin Ezell as the president, nor a lot of the people who have done what he has asked them to do. However, that's not within my ability to change, but it is within our ability to make things known. And that is what the Lord has asked us to do, and to that we have been faithful.
Sandy, I have no more questions. I have no more notes. With any comments that you care to make, this is going to conclude the testimony in the Will McRaney versus North American Mission Board. Do you have anything in closing that you would like to tell the jury and the audience? If not, you'd say, nope, we've covered it all.
I think we've covered it all. I said what I wanted to say. The Lord gave me some thoughts as I was speaking as well, and I am satisfied with what I've conveyed.
Thank you.